And I think this session is called Stump the Murray. Is that right? Or
if you like.
So look, we will start to run through some questions. We did have some questions that were raised during the registration process as well. If you do have any questions, please use that Q&A button. Jump in, take advantage of the fact that we've got Murray on the call here. Give me some great ammunition and let's see what we can do. Now, Murray, I've stopped sharing my screen. You can feel free to share your screen if you actually want to go into some answers in a little bit of detail. But I want to start with the first one here. How can I enter invoices for overseas freight logistics at the correct date when I need to include the freight as an on-cost at the time of inwards goods receipt, which is, of course, about 6 to 8 weeks later?
Yeah, this old chestnut. I don't think a user group goes by where this question doesn't get raised. There's no simple answer, and I would encourage you, Mary, just to reach out to your Exo support partner to talk through the specifics, because there is a bit to this, and you know, we can get, I don't want to get bogged down in the details now, but you know, it can also look at the types of invoices you've got coming through and the best way to process those invoices. But the answer to your question, to directly answer your question, is to process your logistics invoice, coding it to a general ledger code or to a lookup stock item, just to get that invoice entered and paid. And then when you finally do receive the stock, then receipt the goods in at the time of receipt at the correct, costing them into stock correctly, and reversing out that initial invoice that you processed to your logistics partner. Now, one way to do that from a purchase order perspective is actually to enter in a credit line on the PO that you can use to process that credit line when you do the inwards goods receipt. So you process the first line through, and they're both coded to the same either GL account or lookup stock code. Process the first line when you have to pay the invoice, and then process the second line when you're doing the inwards goods receipt. So the net effect to the supplier is zero because you've already paid the invoice, but it allows you to process those goods at the time you receive them. So
I'm not sure if that was quite stumped, Murray, but some good feedback there, some good feedback. Now look, we're going to continue on to another one, and there's a bit of a question here. What is the best method to part invoice but not ship a large piece of machinery? A client might need it for a legitimate copy for financing, for example. Now, we don't really know if this is job costing or typical sales orders. Maybe if you could talk through that question from the context of both approaches, sure. Murray.
Yeah. So if it's part of a job costing process, and if it's a large piece of machinery, it's quite possible that you are doing it through job costing, because there could be some assembly required. There could be some additional items that get included in that machinery. You can raise a billing schedule invoice, not a pro forma invoice, a progress claim invoice, to invoice out the part that needs to be paid up front, and then again we can reverse that out when we process the full invoice at the end, when you're actually supplying the machinery. Now the key here is to code either the progress claim, or if you're doing it through sales orders, you can simply again enter in a lookup item. But the key is either the progress claim or the lookup item on your sales order needs to be coded to a deposits account. And then you put that through to your deposits account so that financially you're not recognizing it as revenue until you've actually supplied the goods. And then, like we talked about with our inwards goods question, you can put in a credit line, again, either through job costing or through your sales order, at the time that you're actually billing out the goods. So that credit line should again be coded to the same deposits account that you raised your initial invoice off, and then that will offset what's sitting in the deposits account, bringing the balance of your deposits account back down to zero, and then invoicing out the goods at time of supply and recognizing as revenue then.
Very good, mate. That was almost a little bit of accountant kind of creeping out of you then. Careful.
You can't take the accounting out of the boy.
Look, this isn't Accountants Anonymous. We're going to move on to some more questions. So we often prepare several batch payments in advance while going through a review and payment approval process. Is there a way to set up more than one payment batch, pay status, or an alternative so that these batches can easily be brought back into payment processor and modified if needed or processed whilst other payment batches are awaiting approval? Now, that's a bit of a long one, Murray. Did you get all of that?
I did. I'm going to share my screen. For this one, I'm going to share my screen. Inside creditors batch payment processing, if we just bring this up. Now, I did talk about something very similar in our last user group forum back in September, where I talked about using creditor account groups to break out your creditor payments into batches, and that would certainly work for this scenario as well. But just to kind of mix things up a little bit and give you some alternatives, there is actually something else that we can use, which is these account lists. So if I go to, I think it's under utilities, set up account lists, I can create account lists here. Great spelling, Murray. Should be so proud of that. And then we add accounts to it. All right. So we can, from our payment batch, let me actually bring up our payment batch list first. I'm going to back out of here. I'll say no to that. Let me pick an account that's actually there. Okay. So here's our list of accounts that we want to pay. And the question is, we want to be able to split these up into separate batches so that we're processing some of them, getting approvals from say one manager, where another batch might be getting an approval from another manager, and so on and so forth. So we can do that by creating these account lists. And I spelled it wrong again. Let's just stop at that. Okay. So now, if I choose list 3 and hit search.
Is that a bit of Kiwi coming out, Murray?
Yes. The Aussie Car Parts is the only account that's been assigned to that batch. So that's one way of managing that particular question or that problem.
That's great. Thank you, Murray. Good question there, Mary. Now, another question here, and I might just keep this one going while we've got some Exo focus questions. Can Exo perform automatic journals to account for currency differences between the invoice input and payment? Now, I'm not sure if this is on the debtor's side or the creditor's side, Murray, but if you can just talk through that general process around Forex, that'd be great.
The really short answer is yes, and it doesn't matter if it's debtors or creditors. Let's go to our ledger posting screen. And if I expand out these two options here, debtors and creditors, see if I can make this larger. We've got these two checkboxes here, realize FX gains and losses. So not only can it do it, but it can automate it. It can't be simpler. As long as you've got those ticked, it will take up the realized gains and losses in both debtors and creditors. Now, if you're also looking at automating your unrealized gains and losses, that can be built into part of your end of month rollover. So you can realize or take up your unrealized gains and losses as part of your month end rollover as well.
Perfect. Great question for today's theme with automation, Murray.
Yeah.
All right, next one. Why can you have multiple selection criteria when creating a report in Sales Analysis Designer? And why doesn't the grouping incorporate all data fields. Now, some of our audience might not actually be aware of sales analysis, which is a great little piece of functionality. So could you just give us the 2-minute overview, Murray, and then maybe jump into that question in some detail?
So Sales Analysis Designer was created to provide non-technical people with a way to build out their own sales reports without having to get into the mire of learning a true report builder tool like Clarity. So Sales Analysis Designer was a compromise where it tried to give you as many different selection options in terms of filters and groupings as possible, whilst still making it simple and easy to build a report. So if we look at report types, we can see that we've got 12 months, period-based, etc., 5 weeks, and there is a date range as well, where you actually just get to pick the date range. So let's run with 12-month sales. And then you've got options around groupings. So if I bring up this, and I'll just quickly list out you can see that there are a lot of different groupings that we can use, and this is just one level. You actually got 2 levels of groupings that we can work with here. So, and then in addition to your main groupings, you can enter in filters. So where here we can say, and let's take a quick scan through all of those different field options. So we can say where where's account groups? Account groups is always a good one to pick on. Account group, not price group, I don't want price group, I just want account primary group name. Yeah, like. And then we can add in that. Now, if we wanted to say multiple account groups, we just add criteria. And then we could add in as many fields as we like. And then once we've built up our report like that, we can preview it, we can export it to Excel, whatever we like. And it is, as I said, a simple way of generating sales reports. Now, to address the question, and just conscious we're running out of time, to address the question around why is there so many groupings, hopefully I've answered that in my little explanation of why Sales Analysis Designer was created. And why doesn't the grouping incorporate all data fields? Again, it's a compromise between a true report builder like Clarity, where you've got huge amounts of variability in what you can do, and also trying to provide as many of the most commonly selected groupings and filters that people would like to build into a sales report.
Very good. Fantastic. Thanks, Murray. And of course, if your requirements do get a little bit more complex around reporting, a bit beyond what sales analysis can provide, you could take that next step of looking at Clarity. Clarity, we could produce a Clarity report that gets at the same data and provides similar sort of functionality, but it does give you more flexibility. And then, of course, there are ISVs such as Focus and Alchemix, the Bureau setting talked to previously, that go into more of the analytics piece and business intelligence side. So a couple of different approaches there. Now, Murray, how can we add additional visible columns into the interface of various screens? For example, in stock items details or the orders tab or the purchase order screen, in the stock item details screen with the orders tab, with the purchase order section, currently there's no option to show inwards goods receipt date. As a purchase order is shipped, it is better that the purchase order line is managed from inwards goods receipt windows than the original PO line. At the moment, they're changing the PO line's due dates as well as the receipt date to keep data up to date for all users to see the due date under stock item details. Did you get that?
I did get that. Yep. So the short answer is, yeah, you can. And let's go in and take a look at how we can do that. Now, obviously, The challenge that we have here, though, is that the inwards goods receipt date is not showing or is not a field on the purchase order header by standard. However, because there is a direct link between the PO and the inwards goods receipt, we can create a trigger that will populate an extra field on the PO header that will basically capture that information once the goods have been received in. And then from there, we should be able to display that information on the PO. So reach out to your support partner, explain the scenario to them. They should be able to set you up with a little trigger that'll write that into the PO header when the goods have been received, and then we can pull that through. Now, the pulling it through, let's take a look at how we tackle that. So if we go into Exo config, and Stephen, just let me know if we're running out of time here.
We've got a few more minutes. We'll make it work, Murray.
Probably the only limiting factor with including additional information on those search screens is the character length on the profile, because it is a profile, and in the profile you can record the extra field that you want to pull through and then the name that you want to call it on that search screen. So if you've got multiple extra fields, and we saw an example of that in the Exo demo where we had all those extra WMS columns coming through on our sales order search screen. You've got multiple extra fields that you're wanting to pull through. At some stage, you're going to run out of character length within the profile. So if we go extra, these are all the fields that we can work with. And so if I drag my little Q&A box out of the way, I can continue to scroll down. Actually, I might just minimize it. And scroll down, and you can see here are the ones that we had. Oh, that's some job costing. We've got additional. They're the ones that we looked at in sales orders, and here's our purchase order search screen. So the short answer is yes, but in your specific scenario, we're probably going to have to write a little trigger to populate that into the purchase order header in order to display it.
Perfect. All right, now I think we'll fit in two more, Murray. First one here, and there's not a lot of detail, but they're saying that they've noticed that Exo is getting slower recently.
Ooh.
Are there any simple changes I can make to speed it up?
Okay.
Well, that's how long is a piece of string. But yeah, can you give us a little bit more information?
Yeah, like the one simple thing that you can do that may or may not help, but oftentimes it does, is take a look at how many sales orders that you've accumulated over time. If Exo's starting to slow down, you've probably got thousands and thousands of sales orders that are still sitting within that sales order header and sales order lines tables. Now, there is archiving functionality within Exo that allows you to archive off both sales orders and purchase orders. It's simply a utility that you run from Exo itself. You don't need to bring a consultant in. You do need to put some thought into what you're going to be archiving before you jump in and do it, because obviously you don't want to be archiving off active sales orders. So you need to be a little bit careful there to make sure that you're tackling fully processed orders only, or cancelled orders, and that you've selected an appropriate date range that you want to archive off. Because even if they're fully processed, you might want to look back at your last 6 months orders or something like that. So talk to your sales team. Make sure that you're not going to cause anyone any headaches before you hit the button. But if you find that Exo is still running slowly after you've gone through those simple processes, there are a lot of things that we can look at in terms of identifying where the performance issues are, and then putting changes in place to optimize your Exo database. And there are optimization projects that can be kicked off where we work through with you to understand where your pain points are. Then we go and we take a look at the database and we do a bit of a deeper dive into what's happening in that database. And then we work through a series of checklists to make sure that we're ticking everything off, basically leaving no stone unturned. And at the end of it, we almost always produce a great outcome in terms of improving performance. And it could be as something like rewriting some reports, which every time you run the report, because of the way it's been created, it slows the system right down. Might have run beautifully when it was first written, but over time, with the amount of data that it's now trawling through, that can also cause pain.
So, but there's a bit of a follow-up question here as to, once you've undertaken some archiving, can you automate the archiving process so that it essentially automatically archives once sales are over a certain number of years old?
Yes, you can, but because it's honestly, you're only ever going to archive every X amount of months. It's not something that really you would need to automate. But if you wanted to, yes, I without a doubt we could automate that process. It's essentially just going through and moving data off one table and moving it onto another table to clear up the working table, if you like. So if you've got working, think of it like a computer, you've got long-term memory, you've got working memory. All you're doing is you're shifting data out of the working memory and moving it into long-term storage. There is more that we can do around that though, and not necessarily just with sales orders. Like we could archive jobs, for example, job transactions, and we can do some smarts around that as well. So we can put in some additional filters. So you want to archive this type of job, but not this type. You want to archive this type of sales order, but not this type. Now we can smarten up or enhance what Exo gives you out of the box.
Yeah. Maybe just to add to that, Murray, I think you certainly need to take a very considered strategy around looking at performance. It's easy to jump in and dive in and start to try and make some changes. It's actually best to take a bit of a step back, do a little bit of analysis first, understand what's actually causing the impact, and focus your time and effort on not necessarily the low-hanging fruit, but the changes that are going to bring the biggest value in terms of this performance impact. Sometimes that can be a combination of some low-hanging fruit. Sometimes it needs some more considered approaches in terms of getting the performance improvements that you're looking for.
Yeah.
Now, another question here, can you recommend the best third-party CRM that works best with Exo and allows you to process invoices through the same program? Now, I might just talk to this one, Murray. Of course, we do have MYOB Exo CRM. I do notice the questions around the best third-party CRM, so I'm going to assume that doesn't fit your requirement for some reason. In which case, there are a number of CRM applications that we've actually integrated into Exo. Kilimanjaro actually has a framework called the Syncit integration framework. So with Syncit, we have integrated Exo into CRM applications such as Salesforce and HubSpot. To the point that the opportunity pipeline process can actually create quotes in Exo, opportunities in Exo, sales orders in Exo, and then once those goods are shipped, and can actually automate the invoice process. So you can get to the point where Exo is still being used as your source of truth in terms of the financial transactions and the stock transactions. But in terms of the sales responsibility, they're doing their job within the CRM application, and the integration's taking care of the automation and the flow of the data between those systems. So it certainly is possible. Again, it needs to be something that's carefully considered in terms of the approach, making sure you've got clear delineation of your sources of truth and what that process flow looks like. But you can certainly get some very efficient processes with a third-party CRM system fully integrated into Exo. If you have any questions around that, again, just reach out to your support partner for further information. Thank you, Murray. I don't think we managed to stump you, except maybe one. I did ask you at a previous session what the acronym of EXO was. And I kind of got you, let's be honest, mate. I kind of got you. It's not an acronym at all. But let's just go back to this one. What does the acronym of MYOB stand for?
Mind your own believe.
Ah, right. Okay. I think you might be right in the context of that new campaign, but originally, of course, mind your own business. Fantastic. Thank you, Murray.